Have you ever felt the sting of someone pulling away just when things were starting to feel real? One moment they're close, the next, they're gone. No explanation, no closure, just distance. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that emotional disappearing act, you may have been dealing with an avoidant. And here's the hard truth. Avoidants don't come back because you miss them. They come back when something shifts. In this speech, we're going to uncover exactly what that shift is and how it has everything to do with you, not them. Because real change doesn't happen by chasing them. It happens when you finally start choosing yourself. Avoidant attachment is a pattern of behavior rooted in early life experiences, often formed during childhood. People who develop this attachment style typically learned, consciously or unconsciously, that emotional closeness is risky or uncomfortable. As a result, when relationships start to deepen, they instinctively pull away, not because they don't care, but because intimacy feels threatening. To understand why avoidants behave the way they do, we need to look at their emotional wiring. Many avoidants grew up in environments where their emotional needs weren't met in consistent or nurturing ways. They may have been taught, directly or indirectly, that needing others was a sign of weakness, or that expressing vulnerability would lead to rejection, disappointment, or even punishment. So to protect themselves, they learn to self-soothe, stay independent, and minimize the importance of emotional bonds. As adults, this early conditioning manifests in how they approach relationships. They often appear distant, emotionally unavailable, or commitment phobic. When things start to feel too close, they may suddenly withdraw, stop communicating, or seem cold. This behavior isn't always deliberate or malicious. In fact, many avoidants struggle with a deep internal conflict. On one hand, they do want love and connection, but on the other, they fear being engulfed, losing control, or being emotionally overwhelmed. This push-pull dynamic creates confusion for both the avoidant and their partner. To someone with a secure or anxious attachment style, the actions of an avoidant can feel deeply hurtful or confusing. It may seem like they're playing games or trying to manipulate, but what's really happening is a self-protective mechanism kicking in. Their nervous system interprets closeness as danger, so distancing themselves feels like safety. It's important to understand this isn't about you not being good enough or doing something wrong. Their behavior is a reflection of their internal emotional blueprint, not your worth. One of the most critical things to realize is that trying to fix or chase an avoidant usually backfires. When they feel pressure, they retreat further. Emotional pursuit, pleading, explaining, over-texting can make them feel smothered or trapped. Their instinct is to regain space and autonomy, so any attempts to bring them closer emotionally tend to reinforce their need to disconnect. This is why people often feel like the more they try to reach the avoidant, the more distant they become. What complicates things further is that avoidants often don't fully understand their own behavior. They might not be consciously aware of why they're pulling away or why intimacy scares them. They may say they need space, that they're not ready, or that they're confused. These are often genuine expressions of their internal struggle. However, because they tend to suppress emotional reflection, they don't always take the time to process or heal these patterns. This is why change typically doesn't happen until they experience a powerful internal shift, either through loss, self-awareness, or personal growth. It's also worth noting that not all avoidants are the same. There are variations, such as dismissive avoidants, who minimize the importance of relationships and pride themselves on independence, and fearful avoidants, sometimes called disorganized, who both crave intimacy and fear it, leading to a chaotic relationship style. Regardless of the subtype, the core issue remains the same. Intimacy feels dangerous because at some point in their development, it was associated with pain, inconsistency, or emotional neglect. Understanding the avoidant attachment style is not about excusing poor behavior, but about gaining clarity. When you understand where their patterns come from, you can stop taking their actions so personally. More importantly, you can shift the focus back to yourself, your own healing, your own emotional needs, and your own boundaries. because waiting for an avoidant to come back without addressing the root cause on both sides is a painful cycle. True reconnection, if it happens at all, only comes when both people do the inner work. And that starts with deep understanding. When dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, one of the most common and instinctive reactions, especially for those with anxious or secure tendencies, is to chase after them when they start to pull away. This chase can take many forms: texting them frequently, asking what went wrong, trying to fix things, making emotional appeals, or reminding them of the good times you shared. While these actions often come from a place of love, confusion, or desperation, they almost always have the opposite effect. The more you chase, the more avoidants withdraw, and there's a psychological reason behind this. Avoidant individuals value emotional space and autonomy above all else. In their internal world, closeness often equals loss of control, vulnerability, or even emotional danger. So when a partner starts pursuing them, especially during a period of withdrawal, they interpret it not as love or concern, but as pressure, threat, or intrusion. This perception triggers their emotional defenses, leading them to create even more distance. What feels like a natural, caring response to you can feel suffocating to them. This dynamic is particularly frustrating because it creates a vicious cycle. The more the avoidant withdraws, the more anxious or confused the other person becomes. That anxiety fuels the chase, more questions, more texts, more emotional effort, and with every attempt to pull them back, the avoidant feels an increasing need to escape. In many cases, this leads to a complete communication shutdown, emotional coldness, or even ghosting, and it leaves the person chasing feeling rejected, unworthy, and helpless. One of the hardest truths to accept in this situation is that your emotional intensity, no matter how sincere, is not what draws them back. In fact, the avoidant only begins to feel safe reconnecting when the emotional pressure is removed. This is why detachment is so crucial. When you stop chasing and begin to reclaim your energy and focus, you unintentionally signal something powerful to the avoidant, that you're no longer emotionally overinvested, and that you're not a threat to their independence. Paradoxically, it's this emotional neutrality, not your affection or effort, that makes an avoidant feel safe enough to re-engage. This doesn't mean you should manipulate the situation by pretending not to care. Fake detachment often backfires because it's just another form of chasing in disguise. Avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional tension, and they can usually detect when someone is faking calmness while secretly hoping for a reaction. What actually works is genuine detachment, the kind that comes from shifting your focus inward and accepting that the outcome is out of your hands. When you stop trying to control how they respond and start focusing on your own peace and healing, everything changes. There's also a deeper layer to this. Many people who chase avoidance are doing so not just because they want the person back, but because they are unconsciously trying to fix something deeper within themselves. The chase becomes a way of proving their worth, of soothing abandonment wounds, or of clinging to a fantasy that if they just say or do the right thing, the person will come back and love them properly. But this isn't love, it's emotional survival. And avoidants, whether they know it or not, are often repelled by this kind of emotional intensity because it mirrors their own inner chaos. Real connection with an avoidant doesn't come from convincing them, changing their mind, or showing how much you care. It comes from letting go. And letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving yourself back to yourself. It means no longer participating in a pattern that's based on fear, control, or emotional dependence. When you step out of the chase, you create the only environment in which an avoidant might consider coming back. One where they feel free to choose, rather than pressured to respond. In the end, chasing an avoidant is like running toward a door that only opens from the inside. No matter how hard you push, you won't be let in until they decide it's safe. And they'll only make that decision when they no longer feel like your peace depends on their presence. So instead of knocking harder, walk away with self-respect, because the real invitation isn't to run after them, it's to return to yourself. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood, especially in the context of relationships with avoidant individuals. Many people hear the term and think it means becoming cold, distant, or shutting down emotionally, but true emotional detachment is not about abandoning your feelings. It's about gaining control over them. It's the practice of creating internal balance, of no longer allowing someone else's actions or lack of actions to dictate your sense of peace, worth, or stability. And when you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, this inner balance becomes essential, not just for your well-being, but also for the possibility of ever reconnecting with them in a meaningful way. Avoidants often operate in extremes. They can be warm and open one moment, then closed off and unreachable the next. This hot and cold behavior can feel like emotional whiplash for the person on the receiving end. And without emotional detachment, it's easy to get caught in a cycle of overanalyzing, reacting, and losing yourself in their inconsistency. You start making their behavior the center of your thoughts, constantly wondering what went wrong, what you did, or what you can do to bring them back. This mental and emotional obsession isn't just exhausting, it's disempowering. It keeps you emotionally hooked to someone who, at least in the moment, is not capable of giving you what you need. When you begin practicing emotional detachment, everything changes. First and foremost, you reclaim your energy. Instead of pouring all your thoughts and feelings into someone who isn't meeting you halfway, you begin redirecting that energy inward toward your own healing, clarity, and growth. You stop trying to decode their mixed signals and start listening to your own emotional needs. This shift not only brings peace, but it also reestablishes your sense of self, something that often gets lost when you're caught in the emotional chaos of an avoidant dynamic. Emotional detachment also breaks the invisible power struggle that tends to form in these relationships. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to emotional intensity. Even if they don't express it, they can feel when someone is emotionally leaning too heavily on them. And that weight often triggers their flight response. When you detach, you remove that pressure. You stop trying to pull them closer or control the outcome. And in doing so, you become emotionally neutral. This neutrality is powerful. It communicates that your world no longer revolves around them and that you can hold space for your emotions without needing them to fix or respond to them. This is often when avoidants start to feel safe enough to return. Not because you tricked them or manipulated the situation, but because your emotional detachment created an environment where they no longer feel threatened or pursued. You've shown through your energy, not your words, that you're not clinging, not waiting, and not trying to change them. And that space is what they need to even consider coming closer. For someone who fears losing their autonomy, this sense of freedom can be surprisingly magnetic. Another key aspect of emotional detachment is letting go of expectation. This doesn't mean you stop hoping or caring. It means you stop attaching your peace to a specific outcome. You accept the possibility that they may never come back, and you make peace with that. This acceptance is not a loss, it's a liberation. It frees you from the need to constantly monitor, wait, or adjust yourself in response to them. It allows you to focus fully on what you can control: your boundaries, your healing, and your future. Emotional detachment is not about punishing the avoidant or playing hard to get. It's about choosing self-respect over desperation, clarity over confusion, and stability over emotional chaos. It's not an act of rejection, it's an act of self-protection and emotional maturity. When you learn to detach, you stop being emotionally reactive and start being emotionally resilient. You no longer get pulled into their storms because you've built your own calm center. And from that place, whether they come back or not, you win because you've chosen yourself. Reclaiming your sense of self is one of the most powerful and necessary steps you can take after being involved with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. When you're caught in the cycle of emotional highs and lows, constantly reacting to their distance or silence, it's easy to lose touch with who you are outside of the relationship. You may find yourself questioning your worth, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering them, or shrinking parts of yourself just to keep the connection alive. Over time, your identity becomes entangled with the pursuit of their love or approval. That's why reclaiming your sense of self is not just about healing. It's about remembering who you were before you started losing yourself. The process begins when you shift the focus from them back to you. This means turning inward and asking honest, sometimes uncomfortable questions. What parts of myself have I been neglecting to maintain this relationship? What do I truly want in a partner beyond just keeping this one? Where have I been ignoring my own boundaries, needs, and intuition just to feel close to someone who keeps pulling away? These questions are essential because they force you to see the ways in which your energy has been externally focused on fixing, pleasing, or rescuing someone who wasn't meeting you with the same effort or emotional availability. Reclaiming yourself is also about rebuilding confidence, not the surface level kind that depends on validation from others, but the deep, inner kind that reminds you of your value regardless of who stays or leaves. When you've been with someone avoidant, their emotional unavailability can slowly erode your self-esteem. You start to feel like you're too much for wanting connection, or not enough for them to stay. But the truth is, it's not about you not being enough. It's about them not being emotionally ready or capable of reciprocating. Reclaiming your sense of self means refusing to internalize someone else's emotional limitations as a measure of your own worth. Part of this reclamation process also involves reconnecting with what brings you joy, purpose, and peace outside of the relationship. When avoidant dynamics dominate your emotional world, it can become all-consuming. You may have stopped doing things you love, distanced yourself from friends, or even sacrificed personal goals while trying to make it work. Now is the time to slowly return to yourself, to your passions, your creativity, your friendships, your inner world. These aren't just distractions, they're reminders of your wholeness. You are not a person in waiting. You are not half of a broken connection. You are a complete human being, and your life has value and meaning beyond this one relationship. Another key part of reclaiming yourself is reestablishing boundaries. Avoidant relationships often blur boundaries because of the inconsistency and emotional confusion they create. One moment you feel connected, the next you're shut out. This emotional instability can lead you to overextend, giving more than you receive, tolerating emotional unavailability, or staying silent to avoid conflict. Reclaiming yourself means drawing clear lines again, what you will and won't accept, how you expect to be treated, and what kind of emotional presence you need in a relationship. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors that you choose when to open, and for whom. Importantly, reclaiming your sense of self doesn't require the avoidant to come back, apologize, or even understand what they've done. This journey is yours, and its power lies in the fact that it doesn't depend on anyone else. It's about stepping out of the emotional fog they may have left you in and walking into the clarity of who you are, independent of anyone's love, attention, or approval. When you stop basing your sense of identity on how someone else treats you, you begin to experience a profound shift. You stop being reactive and you start being intentional. You stop waiting for closure and you start creating your own. And ironically, it's often in this space when you've reclaimed your wholeness and stopped chasing that the avoidant may reappear, but by that point, you'll be in a different place. You'll no longer be seeking rescue or reunion. You'll be evaluating, discerning, and choosing whether that relationship aligns with your healed self. Because once you've truly reclaimed yourself, you realize that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with you. True alignment is a state of inner clarity, emotional stability, and self-connection that changes not only how you relate to yourself, but how others experience you. When it comes to avoidant partners, this alignment becomes the invisible but powerful force that determines whether or not they feel safe enough to re-engage. Avoidants, by nature, are drawn to emotional independence and are repelled by emotional pressure. What they often don't realize, though, is that they're subconsciously drawn to people who reflect calmness, self-respect, and emotional consistency, qualities they themselves struggle to embody. When you step into that kind of alignment, you stop trying to pull them in and instead begin to attract them in a way that feels safe, not suffocating. But here's the truth. You don't reach this place by trying to manipulate them into returning. You get there by focusing on yourself fully and without conditions. Alignment is not about pretending to be fine or forcing detachment. It's about genuinely becoming okay with whatever outcome life brings, especially when it comes to love and connection. This level of surrender only happens when you have taken the time to process your emotions, to grieve if necessary, and to rebuild your emotional foundation. You no longer operate from a place of fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of not being chosen. Instead, you begin to operate from a place of deep self-trust. You know what you bring to the table, and you know you no longer need to convince anyone to stay. That kind of quiet power speaks volumes to someone who is avoidant. It shows them, without you saying a word, that you're not dependent on their validation, and that your life has meaning and value, whether they're in it or not. What makes true alignment so magnetic is that it removes the very things avoidants fear: emotional entanglement, neediness, and the pressure to perform emotionally. When you're aligned, you don't make someone else responsible for your emotional well-being. You're not chasing, fixing, or constantly reacting. Instead, you're observing, discerning, and responding from a grounded place. This emotional stability is incredibly rare and deeply attractive, especially to someone who is used to either being pursued or pressured. It creates a dynamic where they can approach without fear of being consumed. That safety is what many avoidants never knew they needed. At this stage, the avoidant may begin to feel something they couldn't feel before: curiosity. They may wonder how you became so calm, so at peace, so detached from the outcome. They may find themselves thinking about you in moments of silence, revisiting old memories, or even missing your presence in a way that feels unfamiliar. But this shift doesn't occur because you sent the perfect message, waited the right number of days, or followed some dating strategy. It happens because internally you've changed. You are no longer energetically pulling, and that change is what allows space for someone else to show up differently, if they're ready. It's important to be clear that true alignment doesn't guarantee their return. That's not the goal, and it's not the point. The purpose of alignment is not to get someone back, it's to get yourself back. If they do return, you'll now have the clarity and strength to assess whether they're capable of meeting your needs in a healthy and consistent way. You won't fall back into the old dynamic because you're no longer the same person who tolerated it. And if they don't return, you'll know you can move forward with grace because your peace is no longer dependent on their presence. The ultimate truth is this: real connection is only sustainable when both people are aligned with themselves first. You can't build something healthy with someone who is emotionally avoidant while you're emotionally ungrounded. But when you've done the work, when you've reclaimed your self-worth, processed your pain, and detached from outcome, you change the energy entirely. You become a mirror of emotional health, and that mirror reflects back to the avoidant what they have to face within themselves. Whether they rise to meet you or not is up to them. But by standing in your alignment, you've already won, because you've returned to the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. In the end, Navigating a relationship with an avoidant partner is not about strategy, persuasion, or emotional effort. It's about transformation, starting within yourself. Avoidants don't respond to pressure, pleading, or pursuit. They respond to space, calm, and emotional clarity. The moment you stop chasing and start choosing yourself, the entire dynamic shifts. When you emotionally detach, reclaim your identity, and step into true alignment, you no longer operate from lack or desperation. You begin to lead from strength, stability, and self-worth. This isn't about giving up hope. It's about giving up control. It's about realizing that no one else is responsible for your peace, and that the most powerful path forward is the one where you're centered in yourself. If they come back, it will be because they feel safe in your calm, not cornered by your need. And if they don't, you will have already come home to the strongest, most grounded version of you. That's not just the way to get them back. That's the way to get yourself back fully and completely. And that, above all else, is the real win.